Peace and blessings, beloved. Come here to be educated, empowered, enlightened, inspired, motivated, and challenged to be critical and independent thinkers. Let's get to it.
I mean, I still love New Orleans. I know that New Orleans is a dangerous place. New Orleans has dangerous people. The state of Louisiana doesn't have the most strict gun laws. It's my favorite picture of us. Regardless of what happened that led up to Will dying, I think it should have been handled differently. I think by all parties. I think it should have ended differently.
Peace and blessings, beloved. I pray all is well with you and yours. And welcome to the Life LessonsU Series, Avoidable Tragedy edition, featuring deceased NFLer Will Smith. And in this coverage, we're going to focus on the topics of responsibility, accountability, and foresight, using the tragic, untimely death of NFL great Will Smith. And what you'll see as we watch this video unfold is that what began as a fender bender quickly turned into a life taken. And then you have a life wasted as the individual who took the life of Will Smith. And so what I'll do with this video is play it until the point where I think it's appropriate to stop and discuss, and we'll do that until the end of the video. As always, I want us to pay close attention to the narrative, to each side, so that we can maintain our objectivity. And again, we're going to focus on responsibility, accountability, and foresight, so that we can avoid the pitfalls and mistakes that both of these gentlemen made that resulted in this tragedy. So without further ado, let's get to it.
So it's a Sunday morning, and two neighbors come out and say to me, "Did you hear about the shooting last night? Will Smith was murdered last night in the city of New Orleans."
There's a male down with about 6 gunshot wounds to the chest.
Oh my God. Let's turn now to the growing mystery surrounding the shooting death of a former NFL star. Police have charged a man with second-degree murder for allegedly gunning down former New Orleans Saints player Will Smith.
He's one of the best Saints ever. He gave them a Super Bowl. He's a beloved son of New Orleans.
Make no mistake about it, we absolutely do not tolerate this type of behavior on the streets of New Orleans, and we will build a strong case for the district attorney to prosecute Cardell Hayes to the fullest extent of the law.
All right, beloved. So as we get into this coverage, I want you to pay very close attention to the language used by all parties involved. It's very important to understand the power of language, the power of words to shift and shape one's perspective. And so you'll hear people refer to Will Smith all throughout the video as being beloved in New Orleans, a star who helped bring them a Super Bowl championship in the aftermath of the horrid Hurricane Katrina. And you'll hear the police rep who spoke a day after the tragic night about bringing the best case to the DA in hopes to prosecute Cardell Hayes to the fullest extent of the law. Again, one day removed, without having all the evidence, without having interviewed every pertinent and appropriate party. And then you have other outside reporters who caught it nationally, using language like gunning down Will Smith as far as what Cardell Hayes was responsible for. And so again, terminology like this creates a narrative. And it's unfortunate because what that will do, like it or not, believe it or not, is create a bias that will be hard to overcome, particularly when we're talking about taking this to a jury trial where you have jurors who are seeing these news reports, who are hearing all the rhetoric, and of course who live in New Orleans and have a certain affinity already for Will Smith because of who he played for and what he did for that city. And so what's the point? There are a couple of them. The primary point, I would say, is for this to be a cautionary tale for all of us to avoid putting ourselves in a position of both Will Smith and Cardell Hayes as to not put ourselves at the mercy of someone else. In Will Smith's case, he put himself at the mercy of Cardell Hayes, and in Cardell Hayes' case, he put himself at the mercy of 12. And I'm talking about jurors. And then you have a judge, and then you have witnesses. All of these people have more control over Cardell Hayes' life than he does. And it's really sad. It speaks to the level of injustice in the criminal justice system. And we'll cover that in much more depth with the postscript, where I focus on New Orleans in particular and their gun laws and the stand your ground law, and even their law of split verdicts, which doesn't require a unanimous decision by the jury. So all of these things should act as a cautionary tale for us to do our due diligence, to live righteously, and to do everything in our power to avoid being at the mercy of someone else as far as our fate and or our life.
It's interesting, right? Like, sports and race have always been an intersectional point in American history. Black New Orleans, 7th Ward, 9th Ward, Mid-City, Treme, they sided with Cardell. Everybody else, politicians, power brokers, Drew Brees, Sean Payton, they didn't care what Cardell Hayes was or is. They just knew one of their own got killed.
All right, so what I want to focus on here is the fact that sports and race have always had a relationship in New Orleans, as you heard alluded to in the clip. And much more pertinent to this particular case is the fact that the government and the citizenry of New Orleans cared very little about Cardell Hayes, if at all, outside of his circle of friends and family. They were much more focused on the death of their beloved Will Smith. And it's very important in cases like this, where you have clearly a victim who lost his life, and then you have the alleged perpetrator. Because what happens is a narrative can be created that is so far from the truth, and it can spin so far out of control that by the time the truth has been revealed and uncovered, it's too late. Because in the minds of all the people who are involved outside of the parties, meaning, again, the government, the citizenry, the nation, because everybody caught wind of this story, their minds are already made up. And so Cardell Hayes will forever be etched in their mind as, quote unquote, a monster and a murderer. And it's very unfortunate, because we do our own fellow American citizen a disservice by not being objective and by letting ourselves be ruled by emotions that are charged, no doubt, by words and sentiments that get repetitious airplay and are at the forefront of that which we see on a day-to-day basis.
5 years ago, this team played its entire season on the road. It didn't have a home field. The Superdome had been ruined by Hurricane Katrina. Back then, people didn't even know if the team was coming back. People didn't know if the city was coming back. Not only did the team come back, it took its city's hands and helped its city back on its feet. Congratulations to all of you. New Orleans Saints, 2009 Super Bowl champions. Congratulations.
All right, beloved. So in this clip, we have former President Obama presenting the New Orleans Saints after their Super Bowl win. And I showed this clip because it's clear to me that this very moment, of course, the Super Bowl win But this moment is emblematic of the fact that the table for this tragedy between Will Smith and Cardell Hayes was set in the season that they won the Super Bowl, because it created the narrative, it created the love that the people of New Orleans had for this football team, as it represented hope and redemption in a great comeback story. One could call it the comeback story of the 2000s up to this point. And also of note here is that in every captivating story, in every worthwhile story, one that grips your time and demands of your emotions, there must be a hero and there must be a villain. In other words, there must be one whom the collective can root for and one that the collective can root against. And so we have here Will Smith obviously playing the hero and Cardell Hayes playing that of the villain.
Where your camera at? Come here, let me show you something. Need some help? Read that. That's the number one rule. Rules of the Barber deal. Number one rule. No disrespect in the New Orleans Saints. Look at the second rule. No weapons. You gotta realize something. The Saints been here way before Sean Payton, way before Will Smith. The symbol of the Saints represents the city.
So this is the 2005 Saints team photo. There's a very young, spry Lance Morph, rookie season. And then if we zoom up here, we see Will. And Will, he looked exactly the same. Kind of weird. I guess he was one of those guys that was young that looked older. He was probably 20 or 21. I was probably 19. He was put in a situation where he's very, very blessed and fortunate, being a first-round pick and a Pro Bowl guy. And you know, he made a lot of money, but he understood that it was just as important to give back to his community and touch and help as many people and families as he could. And you know, that's something that he did regularly.
To many of us, Will Smith was a hero, and he gave back in a number of ways to some of the less privileged children of this community, and he was just overall a very good person and a decent man. Certainly, we believed it was a second-degree murder. We believed it was a cold-blooded killing. I certainly believe that this entire event could have been avoided.
So in this clip, we have Will Smith, the quote-unquote hero, once again being painted as a beloved member of the community, someone who was somewhat of a savior for the city of New Orleans. Of course, him with the rest of the members of that Saints team that brought them that championship, their moment in glory. And then you also have the state prosecutor saying that he is seeking the maximum sentence for Mr. Cardell Hayes in the murder and the death of Will Smith. And so once again, what we're talking about is a narrative being created. Now I know everyone has the job to do, and the prosecutor's job is to convince the jury that the defendant is guilty and that he should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. I get that. And that's why I bring home this point that we must do everything in our power to avoid becoming at the mercy of people like this and a system like the criminal justice system, because it never has, nor will it ever love us or treat us fairly, because we're talking about people. Too many factors involved. It's like when people conspire together to do an illegal act and one is caught and they start to turn the tables on the remaining people who are involved. The notion is always things went wrong because there were too many people involved, too many chances for someone to snitch, quote unquote, or fold or lie. And so it's the same sentiment here. Too many people involved when you're talking about somebody's freedom and or their life. And so it behooves us to do everything in our power to avoid being in such a predicament.
Only 2 people know the truth of what happened that night in New Orleans: Cardell Hayes and Will Smith.
If I'm not mistaken, Cardell Hayes is in a Hummer. Will Smith is in a Mercedes. Will Smith is traveling behind Cardell Hayes' vehicle. Cardell Hayes' vehicle comes to a stop in traffic.
Will Smith bangs into the back of Cardell Hayes' car.
And then he goes around Cardell Hayes' vehicle and travels a block or 2 further down the street. He then is stopped again in traffic. Cardell Hayes in his Hummer smashes into the back of Will Smith's Mercedes.
At that point, a few folks get out of the car. There's cussing involved. The third car they bump into, also in front, members of Will Smith's party's car are ready to fight.
Smith gets out of his car, and he gets out of his car for all intents and purposes. He's angry and he's upset. Cardell Hayes gets out of his car, and he's armed with a weapon. There is an exchange of words between the 2 men. Will Smith's wife, Raquel, goes in to try to essentially separate the men. She's not successful in doing that. Will Smith sees Hayes with the gun and then turns to go back to his vehicle.
All right, and so here we are at the tragic night. And what I don't want to do is go over every detail that we just witnessed in the video clip. But I do want to cover the overarching themes from which we can discuss, glean, and learn from. Because the point of this video is to be a cautionary tale that we can learn from in order to avoid making the same mistakes. Because what we see here is that the mistakes of 2 individuals led to the loss of life and loss of freedom, and was definitely avoidable. And so we go from Will Smith leaving the scene of a vehicular accident, which is against the law, Cardell making the choice to pursue Will Smith. He could have decided differently. He could have just took the L and kept it moving. Who knows why he didn't? You could say he wanted to do the right thing. He was upset that this guy was disrespecting him. The fact that he's the owner of a tow truck company could have played a part in how he sees the whole dynamic of hitting a vehicle and the damage seemingly being innocuous but turning out to be more than what was originally thought. Who knows? But that was a turning point in and of itself. And then we have Will Smith's side. Obviously, leaving the scene of a crime is against the law. So that was his first mistake. Well, first mistake regarding this clip. And I say that because you'll see in proceeding clips that wasn't his first mistake, actually. But for all intents and purposes here, that was mistake number 1. And then clearly, we see that once that pursuit of Will Smith ended, there was a showdown where both parties became engaged in a ratcheting up of intensity that was destined for fisticuffs at the very least. 2 very large men. You have the wife of Will Smith getting involved, the friend of Will Smith getting involved. And then you also have Kevin O'Neal becoming involved. And when I say involved, I just mean at the very least exiting the vehicle and putting themselves in position for something to happen to them. So you can say Cardell Hayes' second mistake was tapping Will Smith, being distracted behind the wheel, allowing himself to get to that point where he's close enough to tap Will Smith. He's probably at this point losing control of his emotions, which I'm a big proponent against doing. It's very important, it's critical, it's imperative that we maintain control of our emotions. Because once we reverse that relationship where we're the master of our emotions and it turns into our emotions being the master of us, that's where trouble ensues. Almost always. Things rarely end well when we lose control of our emotions. Now, clearly, we are to emote, we are to show emotion when it's appropriate, but it's all controlled, is what I'm getting to. Even when we do show it, it has to be under control and under our control, not anybody else's control. And so what Cardell could have done was get Kevin O'Neill to take down the information. He's the passenger. You could have stayed focused on the road, and he could have taken down the information. So again, when you're able to think logically and reasonably, then you're able to make those decisions that will lead to you not only surviving but thriving in this life. And then we have on Will Smith's side, once he gets out of his vehicle, he is the aggressor by all accounts. He is the antagonizer. And so that was his mistake. Again, not having control of his emotions. He allowed his emotions to put him in a very vulnerable, precarious position. He didn't know what Cardell Hayes was capable of, or Kevin O'Neill, or if anyone else was in the vehicle, or what they had on them in the way of weaponry. He knew none of this. But again, his judgment was clouded by his anger and whatever else. And then, of course, we see Cardell Hayes making the final mistake in allowing things get to the point where he was willing to take the life of another man. Now, I'm taking everything into account here, and I'm not painting him out to be the bad guy, because again, we see that Will Smith was the antagonizer. Will Smith broke the law, and Cardell, by all accounts, was merely trying to do the right thing. But again, having no control over your emotions very rarely ends well. And we see what happened here. A man was allegedly in fear of his life and ended the life of somebody else, and subsequently injured his wife, which you'll see did play a part in his sentencing. So again, we have a night very tragically unfolded that could have been avoided, and it's much like the things in our life. And we can scale it down and take it for what it's worth for us. It may not always be a life or death situation, but the point is we don't know, particularly when we are engaging with strangers, particularly when we're talking about having disagreements with strangers or dissension with strangers. We do not know what other people are going through, nor do we know what they are capable of. And so it behooves us to take that L, proverbially speaking, meaning that we must let our pride and our egos go, walk away, and live to see another day. And I know it's hard sometimes because we don't want to feel like we're being punked or disrespected or any of those things that attack our ego. But we have to be big picture thinkers. We have to have foresight. We have to be responsible and accountable for our own actions and not blame other people for decisions that we make, because nobody makes us do anything short of putting a gun to our head and genuinely causing us to fear for our life. Outside of that, you're not forced to do anything. And even there, you're not forced to do anything. You could take the consequence and die. But the point is, you're not under duress otherwise to make a decision. So always look to make the wise, righteous decision. And you can only really do that successfully if you have the proper foundation. Now, of course, for me, that foundation is rooted in Christ. My relationship with him is rock solid, and I look to him for all my strength, my purpose, my joy, my perseverance, and everything else that I need to make it from day to day. And so to me, that's your best bet. That's what allows me to stay cool, calm, and collected when things are seemingly out of control around me and you have turmoil and chaos that surrounds. I can be at peace, like Jesus was on the boat during that storm when he slept. And people were wondering, how did he sleeping when all this chaos? We don't know if we're going to die out here and if anybody can come save us or how long the storm's going to be. It didn't matter. He had a peace that the world didn't understand, the world couldn't take away. So that's what I want for us. I want us to have that kind of peace so that we can exercise the best judgment possible for each and every situation that we come before. Because the stakes can range from low to high and everything in between. And to me, it doesn't matter how low the stakes are, because that mentality of making unwise decisions will end up snowballing and stacking up over time to the point where that low stake becomes a high stake before we even know it. And the next thing you know, we've lost freedom and potentially lost our life. And so, beloved, again, that's what I want us to learn from this entire story, this clip in particular. We can always avoid tragedy when we have control over our emotions and over our environment, in a manner of speaking, because both of these gentlemen had control over their environment, which means they were the captain of their ship. And so they made those fateful decisions that resulted in the tragedy that we're studying now.
When we arrived, we located Mr. Smith partially inside of his vehicle, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds to his body. He was later pronounced dead on the scene. We also found his wife, who had been shot to the right leg. She was taken to the hospital where she was treated for non-life-threatening injuries.
It was our theory of the case that the first bullet struck Raquel Smith in the knee. The second bullet strikes Will Smith on the left side of his chest. We then believe, as Will Smith is going into his vehicle, Cardell Hayes is pursuing him and fires 7 more times into the back of Will Smith.
Will Smith was shot a total of 8 times. Cardell Hayes did not miss once. And, he wasn't acting in self-defense. He was acting to kill.
Cardell Hayes remained on the scene. He was taken into custody that evening by the police.
That next morning, his face was on every newspaper in America. My phone buzzed, and I saw all these alerts that Will Smith had gotten killed in New Orleans. I called my editor the next day, Elena Bergeron. She's from New Orleans. And I said, I don't know what this case is. I don't know anything about this case yet, but I feel like we should be there.
Will Smith! I said rest in peace! Will Smith! I said stop the violence! Stop the violence! Stop the violence! Stop the violence!
I couldn't stop crying. I couldn't believe that it was real.
Yeah, I mean, the city was in shock, because, the players are like heroes. They're like gods to people in New Orleans.
All right, beloved, so real quick, just want to touch on a few points here in the shooting aftermath. In the legal system, you have obviously the lawyers, judge and jury, and the prosecuting lawyer that is the lawyer for the state, has a very specific job to do, very simple job, and that's to cast the defendant in such a light where the jury has no choice but to find him guilty. And if the prosecuting attorney gets his way, then that prosecution will be to the fullest extent of the law. And so what really hurt Cardell here were a couple of things. One being that he not only shot Will Smith, but he also shot Will Smith's wife. Now again, if she would have remained in the vehicle, she wouldn't have been shot. But that's neither here nor there. It's a different story, different day. Then you also have the fact that the attorney put the narrative out there that Cardell pursues Will Smith and shoots him dead in cold blood. And to back up that notion, that assertion, Cardell hit a body with every one of his shots. So again, you have the narrative being placed out there where Will Smith is shot dead in cold blood. Cardell didn't miss a shot. And last but certainly not least, probably worse, is the fact that Will Smith was shot in the side and back. And so again, the job of the lawyer, the prosecuting lawyer, is to cast the defendant in a light that would cause the jury to unanimously convict him. And so Cardell did himself no favors by getting in this predicament in the first place. Now, I do have an issue with the optics that shooting someone in the back always makes you guilty, because that bleeds into actual law in certain states where if you're defending your home and you shoot someone in the back who just robbed your home, then you can be held liable for that person's injury and or death. And what's tough for me to understand is the fact that you could penalize someone for defending their home when their home is their sanctuary. It's the place where their family resides and supposed to be safe. And it's the man's job to defend and protect. And so if you're telling that man that he can't shoot someone in the back with the understanding that that man may come back with more people, or he may tell other people to victimize you. So again, I have an issue with that. But back to this point. Again, we can learn that one split-second decision can place our life out of our own hands and our own control and place them in the control of others who have no love for us and who see us as just another statistic. You have the assistant district attorney saying that he wasn't acting in self-defense, he was acting to kill. Again, you place these sentiments in the atmosphere and people cling to them because a lot of people don't like to think critically. They like to receive information and regurgitate it and adopt it as their own, rather than being objective and trying to come to truth. And that's where language becomes the most powerful for the ignorant and the gullible and the naive. And so again, of note, the next morning, Cardell's photo was all over the news, further demonizing him, calling him a monster, saying he gunned down Will Smith. So you see the narrative is already being played out right before our very eyes. And at that time, people took the bait. And again, remember, we're talking about somebody's life that hangs in the balance. And then lastly, what was very troubling to me was to hear this gentleman utter these words. And I already know this, but it's still always troubling to hear sentiments like this. And so you have the gentleman say that these players are like heroes and gods to us. There are people who take sports so seriously that it becomes like a religion to them. And so with any religion, they are godlike figures. that one serves and places on a pedestal. And so in the religion of sport, of course, the people that are placed on pedestals and worshipped are the actual participants. And what's troubling here is that we aren't to ever put anyone on a pedestal. We all are created by one spirit, and that's Yahweh, that's God, that's Elohim. None of us better than the other. None of us deserving of praise or worship. None but God. And so when we place people on pedestals and worship them, we're breaking one of his 10 commandments. And we cannot make it to heaven with him by breaking that commandment. Now some will say, just pray for forgiveness and you'll be all right. Well, it doesn't work like that. Yes, God forgives. He forgives freely. But what he doesn't forgive is a continuing in sin. So if you ask for forgiveness and then go right back to the same sin, then you really weren't serious and genuine and sincere. And so again, beloved, I want to implore you to not get wrapped up in people worship. You don't worship your wife, you don't worship your husband, you don't worship your significant other, you don't worship your job, you don't worship any possession. You can have respect and admiration for those things. If we're talking about spouses, you have the same type of love that God has called you to do. Whether it's your wife to a husband, then you love your husband like the church loves Christ. And if it's the husband to his wife, you love your wife like Christ loved the church. So things have already been set in stone. There's no need for us to think very deeply about how we want to do something. Just abide by the word. God gave it to us for a reason, because it's perfect, and it creates the perfect dynamic, the perfect relationship, one that won't get out of bounds and borderline on worship or borderline on any other kind of sacrilege or sin against God. Do not get wrapped up in people worship. Nothing good comes of it. It's offensive to God, and the last thing you want to do is offend God. So don't put anybody on the pedestal. I don't care who it is.
He was a first-class guy.
Man, when I first saw it that morning, my instinct, when I saw it, the first thing I saw was Will Smith, no lie. First thing I saw, I said, damn, even me, I gotta be guilty, because I was like, damn, that's fucked up. Look how they did Will.
Will Smith was like the football player. I said, oh, that's cool. And he was like, oh, road rage.
Right.
Like,
then I saw who it was, and I said, hey, get the fuck out of here. Something else up. That was my first thing, because I know that man.
I thought it was Will Smith, the actor. I told the chick, man, you tripping. We was sitting right here. I said, hey, man, nobody shooting no fucking Will Smith. That's what we say, but we didn't know it was Will Smith, the football player, until 6 that morning. Then the next page I got after that was Bear's picture. I damn near shit on it.
And I was like, no way.
Then I saw the picture. The first thing I said, the person who told me that, I texted him and said, I don't know what happened. I wasn't there. But whatever happened, they had to make that dude do that.
Right.
That was the first thing I said, because I was like, I know he wouldn't have did that.
It's bad enough that it happened, but then when you kind of learn about the circumstances and how it kind of came about, it should have been avoided for sure.
You said you were in his car together. Where were you guys coming from?
We was coming from a small party.
Yeah, this right here is one of the better parts of the city. Right here is the intersection where it all transpired at. Everything kind of took place right here on this intersection. First off, you gotta try to place yourself in the shoes of Mr. Hayes, somebody who's minding their business, driving down the street.
I think we had 3 basic problems with our case. I think 3 hurdles we had to overcome. The first issue was the fact that Will Smith did, in fact, bump into the back of Cardell Hayes' vehicle.
you getting rear-ended turned from you doing the correct thing, pulling over, to, you know, a person trying to flee the scene of an accident. Like, neither one of us was mad because we was both in good spirits, you know what I'm saying? But we was like, are they really trying to run? Like, where they trying to go? Like, it's people walking all down the sidewalks, it's red lights, it's traffic, like, where they trying to go?
The second issue we had to overcome was that Will Smith had a blood alcohol content of 0.24, which is essentially 3 times the legal limit for someone driving while intoxicated in the state of Louisiana.
Will Smith cursing and doing whatever he's doing. You know, he come run down there at Cardell, basically cursing, swinging at him, trying to fight him.
Cardell Hayes is trying to defuse the situation. Will Smith's wife is trying to defuse the situation. Will Smith is allegedly actively swinging at Cardell Hayes.
The third obstacle we had to overcome was that Will Smith got out of his car and he was upset.
And then, next thing you know, boom, 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 boom.
Response for an adult female knee injury secondary to a fall at Tinker Toys.
Something doesn't feel right about this case. A 6'6", round-headed, thick beard, waving dreads, black man given to the national media as somebody who killed a beloved man who was literally a saint. That already bodes a racial dynamic where you think somebody's going to be at fault, and it might not be the right person.
All right, so friends all saying they have a hard time believing that this was a killing over road rage. So right here it's important to take some time to think about what your loved ones would say about you. What is your brand? What is your character? What kind of person are you? Are you the kind of person that this narrative could be true about? That people would believe, people that know you would believe? Or would your loved ones have the same kind of disposition towards hearing this news? And that's important, not because we should care what other people think, but because if we live a righteous life, then we will no doubt have people that will defend us in this same way, with such confidence and such fervor, because they know for sure that someone with our level of character and integrity could not have shot someone in cold blood. So it behooves us to examine ourselves on a regular basis to make sure that we aren't getting too far off that beaten path of living a life that we can be proud of, and that more importantly that God can be proud of and pleased with. And so moving forward, we get into the testimony of Kevin O'Neal, who shares my same sentiment that the situation was escalated once Will broke the law and left the scene of an accident. And he alludes to how reckless Will Smith was in driving his vehicle away from that scene. He also alleges that Will was the aggressor, cursing and advancing towards Cardell very aggressively. Again, looking for fisticuffs, looking for a fight. And it's very important for us to be objective, even when we're discussing situations regarding people that we love. And so, do I believe that Kevin O'Neal had some sense of bias in this situation? Maybe slightly, but based on what the other accounts are and what we find out about Will Smith, then I don't believe that Kevin was out of bounds at all. I think he was pretty much telling the truth. And again, we see that Will Smith, this decorated NFLer, Super Bowl champion, wasn't innocent at all. And we even have the district attorney who concedes that they have a lot to overcome in building their case because it was Will that caused the accident. And as I was alluding to in the earlier clips that I didn't want to divulge at that time, but Will Smith was 3 times legally drunk. And so we have him breaking the law twice. So again, that's more than likely why he didn't want to stop at the accident, because he knew if the police became involved, they would know that he was drunk and he could have been taken to jail. But maybe not, because again, he is the beloved. Who knows? Who knows? But judging by the tenor of this city and the love that the fans have for their Saints, he most likely would have been let go. So you see, in our own guilt, in our own insecurity, we cause our own downfall oftentimes, because we've already written the ending of the story before it happens in our mind. And the actual ending could have been very different. And so again, we come back to doing the right thing. Just do it because it's the right thing. Not because anybody's looking, or not because you'll be rewarded for doing the right thing, but just do it because it's the right thing. And so if Will Smith would have pulled over, at the very worst, he could have gotten arrested that night for a DWI, would have definitely posted bail, had to go to court, pay a fine. I have no doubt that he would have avoided jail time, and he could have been about his business. It's very unfortunate. Very unfortunate.
He's a clown. He's a clown. Look at that face. Look at that face.
This is my dad.
It's just like you.
Thank you.
And Cardell was 4. And they have it in common. They both love Ninja Turtles. I attended every game Cardell ever played. He was good. He was real good. And I really didn't like him playing football because I didn't want him to get hurt, but he loved the sport.
We started off in the trenches, you know, watching each other back, you know, making sure nobody get outside of me and nobody get past him. And that relationship that we built playing alongside each other in the trenches, it blossomed into a whole brotherhood. I watched him elevate himself, you know, go to school, become an entrepreneur, you know, start up a business. You know, I watched him do all that, you know, with the dreams and hopes of one day being able to take care of his mama, be able to take care of his family how he see fit.
You go hit somebody. 1, 2, 3, jump.
Look, pay attention to what you're doing, TJ. You want me to paint your face?
Football, 2005 from Warren Easton. Some of them I can't tell what year because the decal is gone. This one also was for academics. He had a lot more for different basketball and football and perfect attendance, good behavior, honor roll. Some of them didn't make it. They survived Hurricane Katrina. They're damaged, but I was still able to clean them up a little to display them. He had a full scholarship, but after Katrina happened, he just didn't want to be that far away from us. Cardell really, he stepped up as a young man. He had to grow up a little faster. He chose family over football.
Cardell was this big dude, you know what I mean? Like, he played line. Like, He was very good at it, you know. By the end of 2004, a bunch of different scouting websites said he was a top 50 prospect in Louisiana. And then, it's the tale of so many lives in New Orleans. Katrina hit. 1,500 people died. Cardell did what he had to do. He went to work. He delayed his football dreams.
I woke up and my son's face was being plastered all over. He just did not deserve to be plastered all over the TV screen, called the murderer and a monster, and his baby boy hearing all of that. He was asking every day, where my daddy at? Why my daddy not here? You know, he was starting to feel abandoned by his father, and I didn't want him to feel that way. So, you know, we talked with his mom, and his mama sit him down and told him, you know, what had happened and where his daddy was.
To see his dignity, to see his, you know, respect and all that get taken away from him, you know, is really hard.
Panama City.
All right, here, so we have a look into Cardell Hayes' life. He was a football player, which is where he met his boy, Kevin O'Neal. He was an educated young man, an enterprising young man. Once again, he owns a towing company. And it's very clear that we can see that he's an involved father, which is something to definitely be noted, not because he's a young black man, but because he's an involved father. And even those fathers who stay in the home aren't necessarily involved. And so when I see a young man, a man period, who takes an interest in his child and wants to be around his child and spend time with his child and rear his child, I do applaud that. And then there's also the moment where we see the trophies on display. And so again, it's very important that we are aware of idol worship and to avoid it. It's okay to be proud of your accomplishments. You work hard for it. You sacrifice for it. Absolutely. But keep it in its proper perspective. Be thankful to God for the opportunity, the God-given gifts and abilities, and the success, and leave it there. You don't need to have trophy cases that you walk by, and every time you walk by, no matter how many times it's been, you stop and look and reminisce and smile and pat yourself on the back, whatever. You know what I mean? That's OD. Just take it for what it was. Stop living in the past and move forward, man. Trust me, you'll be the better for it. And what's also important here is that Cardell Hayes chose his family over football. Now, you heard what the situation was and the ill timing of Hurricane Katrina while he was in the midst of having a scholarship to go away for college, you know. So, again, a look into the life of a man who has been castigated and demonized in the public eye, and wrongfully so. And as we can see, this man was a righteous brother. Now, was he perfect? Of course not. But he was an involved father, an entrepreneur, and he had the right perspective on life. He chose his family over his livelihood and was still able to make a good living by making good choices. Now, of course, this one fateful night, he didn't make some great choices, but we see his track record here, and that's what's important. Both sides being told. Now, it's unfortunate that these things weren't revealed at the time in this fashion, but that's neither here nor there. Again, the point here is for us to avoid putting ourselves in a position to be at the mercy of anybody else.